A cop suddenly collapses and doctors can't explain why. Watch till the end to uncover the truth. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. Detective Sarah Martinez had never been the type to back down from anything. At 34, she was already known as one of the toughest officers in the Phoenix Police Department. Colleagues respected her for her sharp instincts, and criminals learned quickly to fear the sound of her voice commanding them to stop. Nights on patrol in downtown Phoenix often meant danger, but Sarah was prepared for it. She had built her career on being unshakable. On that night, however, all of her strength meant nothing. The call log later showed nothing out of the ordinary. Sarah and her partner, Officer Jake Rodriguez, had wrapped up a routine patrol. The streets were quiet, the radio silent except for background chatter from other units. As the pair returned to their squad car parked near an empty intersection, Sarah suddenly faltered. Jake turned, expecting her usual quick comment about wrapping up the shift, but instead he saw her stumble against the car door. Within seconds, her body convulsed violently, collapsing onto the asphalt. "Sarah!" Jake shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. Her limbs jerked uncontrollably, eyes rolling back, breath coming in uneven gasps. Jake checked for wounds. Nothing. No gunfire, no sign of struggle, no trauma. Panic rose in his chest as he radioed for immediate backup and medical assistance. "Officer down. Repeat, officer down." The response was swift. Within minutes, paramedics from Phoenix General Hospital arrived, working frantically as Jake stood helplessly by. They secured Sarah to a stretcher, checking her airway, monitoring her vitals, and speaking in clipped, urgent tones. To Jake's horror, none of them seemed to understand what was happening. She was young, healthy, and strong, yet her body was shutting down before his eyes. By 4:15 a.m., Sarah was in the intensive care unit at Phoenix General. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the hospital's head of emergency medicine, took charge. In her 2 decades of practice, she had seen every possible emergency: heart attacks, overdoses, strokes, violent injuries. But this was different. Sarah's test results made no sense. Her blood work came back clean. No drugs, no poisons, no abnormalities. Her heart scans showed no damage. Her brain scans revealed no trauma. Yet her condition worsened with every hour. Dr. Chen ordered immediate consultations. Within half a day, Phoenix General assembled its most elite specialists. Neurologists, cardiologists, pulmonologists, toxicologists, and infectious disease experts crowded the conference rooms, each bringing their expertise. They reviewed the data, line by line, image by image, report by report. Nothing explained the sudden collapse of a healthy police officer. Dr. Marcus Webb, the hospital's leading neurologist, studied the electroencephalogram readings. The chaotic patterns suggested seizures, but not the kind caused by epilepsy or head trauma. Her pupils were slow to react, her motor responses weakening rapidly. "This is a progressive neurological decline," he told the team grimly, "but the trigger doesn't fit any known condition." Dr. Lisa Park, top toxicologist, reported on her end. "We've run panels for heavy metals, organic toxins, synthetic compounds. Everything comes back negative. If this is poisoning, it's from something that doesn't appear on standard tests." Hours turned into days. Sarah's condition deteriorated. Machines kept her heart rhythm stable and her lungs functioning. Her brain activity dipped dangerously low. Nurses whispered in the corridors and officers gathered in the chapel, praying for a miracle. Captain Rita Vasquez, Sarah's commanding officer, personally reviewed her recent cases. She combed through 6 months of reports, searching for any sign of revenge, an angry criminal, a dangerous suspect, a grudge that might explain what was happening. but Sarah's record was spotless. She had been professional by the book. There were no enemies waiting in the shadows, no signs of retaliation. Meanwhile, Jake Rodriguez sat by her bedside whenever he could, unable to accept what he was seeing. His partner, the strongest person he knew, lay unconscious, hooked to tubes and monitors, slipping further away each day. By the fourth day, the situation had reached breaking point. 20 doctors now hovered over her case. The walls of the conference room were plastered with test results, scans, medical journals, desperate notes scrawled in, marker. Dr. Chen stood before them, frustration visible in her tired eyes. A healthy 34-year-old does not just collapse without cause, she said firmly. We are missing something fundamental. Dr. Webb shook his head. Neurological patterns suggest toxic exposure, but nothing matches. If it's a toxin, it's unlike anything we've seen before. Dr. Park added, We've tested for over 300 substances. The results remain negative, and yet the symptoms are textbook poisoning. The cardiologist confirmed irregular heart rhythms consistent with chemical interference. The pulmonologist described respiratory patterns typical of inhaled toxins. Each specialist presented a piece of the puzzle, but the full picture remained hidden. By that evening, the hospital's mood had shifted from confusion to despair. Sarah's parents arrived from Tucson, sitting at her side and holding her hand. Captain Vasquez told them the truth. Doctors were considering end-of-life care. The words were devastating. No one could understand how this had happened. No bullet, no injury, no virus. Just an officer collapsing in the line of duty, her body betraying her without warning. And somewhere above the intensive care unit, on the top floors of the hospital where the county jail was housed, an unlikely figure listened to the rumors spreading through the prison wing. Marcus Thompson, a convicted felon serving his third year of a 7-year sentence, sat silently in his cell, his mind racing as he pieced together the story. He was not just another inmate. He was once a paramedic, trained to recognize patterns that others might miss. As he lay on his narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling, Marcus realized something that none of the 20 doctors downstairs had considered. The answer was not in Sarah's blood work, or in her brain scans, or in the neat columns of lab results. It was in the environment she lived and worked in every day. And though no one knew it yet, the key to saving her life was about to come from the most unexpected place imaginable, through the bars of a jail cell. On the upper floors of Phoenix General, life carried on differently from the frantic scenes below. The jail ward was a stark place. Steel doors, narrow corridors, and the ever-present hum of security systems. Inmates shuffled through their routines under the watchful eyes of guards. Yet, even here, news from the outside world traveled quickly, especially when it concerned law enforcement. Detective Sarah Martinez's collapse was already the talk of the ward. For most prisoners, the story carried a dark sense of satisfaction. A cop fighting for her life? Many thought of it as karma, justice in a twisted form. But Marcus Thompson didn't see it that way. Marcus was serving 7 years for armed robbery, but before prison, he had been a paramedic in Phoenix for more than a decade. 12 years of rushing into emergencies, treating strangers on the worst days of their lives, and making life-or-death decisions in the back of ambulances. That part of him had never gone away. Even in prison, even stripped of his uniform and his reputation, the instinct to help had remained. He had earned a quiet respect among inmates for his medical knowledge. Prison was harsh, and medical care was often delayed or minimal. Marcus became the person prisoners turned to when something felt wrong. Chest pain, seizures, uncontrolled blood sugar. He couldn't prescribe medication, but he could recognize danger and call for help before it was too late. Guards, too, had learned to trust his instincts. More than once, he had caught early warning signs of trouble the staff had overlooked. So when Marcus overheard the guards talking about a female cop in the ICU, he paid attention. The details were scattered, fragments carried through gossip and half-heard conversations. She was young, healthy. She'd collapsed suddenly on duty. 20 doctors couldn't find the cause. Her condition was worsening every day. Marcus couldn't shake it. He replayed the story over and over in his head. The pattern of symptoms described in whispers: seizures, heart irregularities, respiratory problems, neurological decline, felt familiar. He had seen something like it before. Not often, but enough that the memory stuck. His chance to learn more came during his routine medical appointment. Nurse Patricia Williams, one of the staff members assigned to both the hospital and jail wing, checked his vitals that afternoon. Patricia was a professional, steady, calm, and rarely emotional, but Marcus noticed the exhaustion in her face, the way her shoulders sagged as she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm. "Rough week?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then gave a tired nod. She looked around the room to make sure no one else was listening before lowering her voice. "We have a patient downstairs, police officer. She's dying and no one can figure out why. 20 specialists and we're still at 0. Marcus leaned forward slightly, careful not to push too hard. "What are the symptoms?" Patricia frowned, unsure if she should say more. But something in his tone, the way he spoke like a colleague rather than an inmate, convinced her. "Seizures, cardiac arrhythmias, neurological decline. She can barely breathe on her own." Marcus's mind clicked instantly into paramedic mode. He pictured the symptoms not as isolated pieces, but as part of a larger puzzle. "Has anyone considered environmental factors?" he asked. "Something she might have been exposed to on duty?" Patricia sighed. "They've tested for everything. Drugs, poisons, infections, genetics. Nothing matches. Every test is negative." That evening, back in his cell, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling. 20 doctors had looked and found nothing. That meant they were looking in the wrong place. Hospital specialists thought in terms of diseases, infections, lab numbers. Paramedics thought in terms of environments, exposures, and accidents. He had learned to search for the hidden link between a patient and their surroundings. The symptoms were too specific to ignore. Seizures, breathing trouble, heart problems, neurological collapse. It had to be some kind of exposure. Slow, invisible, insidious. He remembered 2 cases from his years as a paramedic. A sewage worker exposed to gas over weeks, and a factory employee who collapsed after prolonged contact with industrial fumes. Both had been mysteries at first. Both had looked like random organ failures until someone pieced the clues together. By morning, Marcus was restless. He couldn't shake the thought that the answer was right there, waiting to be seen. He knew what it felt like to watch a patient slip away while the doctors were lost in test results. He couldn't stand by, not when he recognized the signs. He asked to meet with the jail's medical coordinator, Dr. James Morrison. Morrison was a tall, cautious man who had worked with Marcus during emergencies in the ward. He knew Marcus wasn't like most inmates. He had experience, training, instincts that had saved lives before. When they met, Marcus leaned across the small metal table in the consultation room. "Doc, I think I know what's wrong with that officer." Dr. Morrison raised an eyebrow. "You've been listening to rumors." "I've been listening to symptoms," Marcus corrected. His voice carried urgency but also calm precision, the tone of someone used to crisis. "Everything I've heard lines up with a type of exposure the hospital won't think to test for. I've seen it before. Twice. Morrison studied him carefully. "You're suggesting you know more than 20 specialists at Phoenix General?" "I'm suggesting they're looking at the wrong things," Marcus replied. "They're testing blood and running scans. That won't show what I'm talking about. The evidence disappears too quickly, but the damage it leaves behind, that matches exactly." Morrison folded his arms. "Even if you're right, how do I explain taking medical advice from a convicted felon?" Marcus gave a grim smile. "Don't tell them it came from me. Present it as a consultation theory. If the evidence proves it, that's all that matters. If it doesn't, no harm done." For a long moment, Morrison said nothing. The room was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He knew Marcus had helped before. He knew his instincts were sharp, almost unsettlingly so, and he knew that, if there was even a chance this prisoner held the key, ignoring it would be reckless. Finally, Morrison leaned back and asked the only question that mattered. "What exactly do you think is killing her?" Marcus drew a steady breath, his voice low but certain. "Chronic hydrogen sulfide poisoning, but not from a place they'd ever expect." The words hung in the air like a spark ready to ignite. For Marcus, the puzzle pieces were falling into place. For Sarah Martinez, clinging to life in the ICU below, the first real hope was about to emerge, from a source no one would ever believe. Dr. James Morrison sat back in his chair, staring at Marcus Thompson with the kind of skepticism that came from years of dealing with inmates who claimed to know more than they did. Still, something in Marcus's eyes, the calm certainty of a man who had seen bodies fail in the back of an ambulance, made him pause. "Hydrogen sulfide poisoning?" Morrison repeated. "That would show up in toxicology tests. They've already run those panels." Marcus shook his head. "Not necessarily. H2S breaks down rapidly in the bloodstream. If the exposure wasn't acute, if it built up slowly over time, the tests would come back negative by the time she reached the hospital. But the cellular damage remains. That's why her organs are shutting down one by one." Morrison frowned. "And you've seen this before?" "Twice," Marcus said without hesitation. "Once with a sewage worker who collapsed after weeks of exposure. Another time with a factory employee dealing with industrial waste. Both times doctors missed it at first because they weren't looking for environmental causes. They assumed it had to be disease. By the time someone thought of hydrogen sulfide, both patients were on the edge of death." Morrison tapped his fingers against the table, torn between disbelief and the gnawing suspicion that Marcus might be right. "And you think this police officer was exposed to the same thing? How? She's not working in sewers or factories." Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice, though no one else was in the room. "Think about her job. Patrol officers spend hours inside their vehicles every day. If her squad car's exhaust system was damaged, if the catalytic converter failed, hydrogen sulfide could leak into the cabin. With ventilation running, she'd be breathing it constantly. Slow exposure, day after day, until her body couldn't handle it anymore." Morrison's expression darkened. The explanation was unnervingly plausible. A hidden danger, not in the streets, but inside the very machine meant to protect her. Marcus pressed on. The seizures, the cardiac arrhythmias, the neurological decline. It all fits. If they test for enzyme disruption patterns instead of just toxins, they'll see it. Morrison rubbed his temples. "Even if you're right, how do I convince the hospital's top specialist to pursue a theory that came from a prisoner?" "You don't mention me," Marcus said. "You present it as a possibility from an outside consultation. They'll follow the evidence if the tests back it up. They don't need to know where it started." For a long moment, Morrison said nothing. Then, with a resigned sigh, he rose to his feet. "All right. I'll make the call." Within the hour, Morrison was on the phone with the toxicology department. Dr. Lisa Park, exhausted after 4 straight days of inconclusive results, answered. "Dr. Park, this is James Morrison, medical coordinator for the jail ward," he began carefully. "I have a consultation question about the police officer case. Have you specifically tested for hydrogen sulfide metabolites? Not the gas itself, but the enzyme disruption markers it leaves behind?" On the other end of the line, silence stretched. Finally, Dr. Park said, "We ran gas panels, but hydrogen sulfide breaks down almost immediately. We didn't look for metabolic markers. Why do you ask?" "Because the symptoms fit chronic exposure," Morrison replied. "Neurological decline, respiratory distress, cardiac irregularities, multi-organ failure. The presentation is classic if you know what to look for." Dr. Park's tone shifted from weary to focused. "That would explain the inconsistencies we've been seeing. But where would a patrol officer encounter hydrogen sulfide?" "Vehicle exhaust malfunction," Morrison said. "Specifically, a damaged manifold and faulty catalytic converter." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "I'll order the tests immediately." While the lab prepared to run specialized enzyme panels, Captain Rita Vasquez received orders of her own. At Morrison's urging, she arranged for Sarah's patrol car to be towed to the department's maintenance bay. Mechanics and hazardous materials specialists surrounded the vehicle, prying open panels, checking every inch of the exhaust system. Hours later, the evidence revealed itself with devastating clarity. The exhaust manifold was cracked, leaking gases directly beneath the cabin. The catalytic converter was corroded, no longer neutralizing toxic byproducts. Worse, the leak sat directly under the intake for the ventilation system. Every time Sarah turned on the air, she had been breathing invisible poison. Captain Vasquez stared at the findings, anger rising in her chest. The vehicle that had carried one of her best detectives into danger every night had become a death trap. She immediately ordered the entire fleet to be inspected. Back at the hospital, Dr. Park gathered the specialists for an emergency meeting. When she presented the preliminary results, the room went silent. The enzyme markers matched hydrogen sulfide exposure. Elevated sulfoglobin levels, disruptions in cellular respiration, damage consistent with prolonged poisoning. Dr. Chen rubbed her forehead, both relieved and frustrated. "So, all this time we were looking for disease when it was environmental." Dr. Webb shook his head in disbelief. "We missed it because we were expecting acute poisoning. The pattern was there, but we weren't looking for it." Dr. Park set down the report firmly. "This is our diagnosis. Hydrogen sulfide poisoning from chronic vehicle exposure. We start treatment immediately." Sarah's treatment protocol shifted that evening. High-flow oxygen to flush her system, antioxidant therapy to combat the cellular breakdown, intensive support for her heart, lungs, and brain. Nurses adjusted the machines. Doctors moved with renewed purpose. For the first time since her collapse, there was direction, a target, a reason to hope. In his cell above the ICU, Marcus sat quietly on his bunk, unaware of the flurry of activity his words had unleashed. He knew they would never attach his name to the discovery, and he preferred it that way. Saving a cop's life wouldn't earn him respect among inmates. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that, for the first time in days, Sarah Martinez had a fighting chance. The maintenance bay of the Phoenix Police Department was usually filled with the ordinary hum of engines and the clatter of tools, but that morning the atmosphere was heavier than usual. Mechanics and hazardous materials specialists gathered around Sarah Martinez's patrol car. The hood lifted, equipment scattered across the floor. Captain Rita Vasquez stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly, watching every movement. She had ordered the inspection herself after Dr. Morrison's urgent message, and now the truth was spilling out before her eyes. The cracked exhaust manifold was impossible to ignore. Blackened residue stained the edges where poisonous gases had leaked for weeks, maybe months. The catalytic converter, corroded and failing, had long since stopped doing its job. And the worst detail of all, the leak sat directly beneath the cabin's ventilation intake. Every time Detective Martinez switched on her air system during patrol, she had inhaled a steady, invisible stream of hydrogen sulfide. A mechanic pulled off his gloves and looked up grimly. "This car's a death trap, Captain. She didn't stand a chance." Captain Vasquez clenched her jaw. The vehicle had been more than transportation. It had been Sarah's partner on the street. Now it was revealed as her would-be killer. "Check every vehicle in the fleet," she ordered sharply. "If this happened once, it can happen again." Meanwhile, back at Phoenix General Hospital, the conference room filled with tension. Dr. Lisa Park stood at the head of the table, holding a report in her hands. Around her, 20 of the hospital's finest specialists leaned forward, their exhaustion evident. For days, they had been trapped in circles of confusion, unable to explain the collapse of a healthy officer. Now, at last, the puzzle was complete. "The results are in," Dr. Park said, her voice steady despite the weight of the revelation. "Specialized enzyme testing confirms hydrogen sulfide exposure. Elevated sulfoglobin, disrupted cellular respiration, widespread tissue damage. The pattern is unmistakable." Dr. Rebecca Chen closed her eyes for a moment, relief and frustration mingling inside her. All this time, we were chasing diseases that didn't exist. It was the car all along. Dr. Marcus Webb, the neurologist, studied the data closely. The neurological decline fits perfectly. The seizures, the sluggish pupils, the collapsing motor function, it all matches chronic hydrogen sulfide poisoning. We missed it because we expected an acute case. We weren't thinking about weeks of exposure building up until her system crashed. Dr. Park nodded. "Exactly. By the time she reached us, the gas was gone from her blood. Only the cellular wreckage remained. That's why our tests kept failing." For the first time in a week, the team had a diagnosis, and with it, a plan. Treatment began immediately. Nurses wheeled in high-flow oxygen tanks, adjusting the masks to flood Sarah's body with clean air, forcing out the last traces of poison. Intravenous antioxidants dripped into her veins, designed to slow the cellular breakdown. Her cardiac rhythms, once wild and erratic, began to steady under careful medication. The ventilator continued its relentless pumping, but her lungs began showing faint signs of cooperation. Dr. Chen moved from machine to machine, monitoring each vital sign with sharp eyes. "Keep her oxygen saturation above 95, she instructed. "If we can stabilize her cells, we have a chance." The room was tense, every beep of the monitors magnified. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, change appeared. The electroencephalogram showed faint improvement in brain activity. Her heart rate settled into a steadier rhythm. Her chest rose and fell with slightly less reliance on the machine. They were small victories, but after days of relentless decline, they felt monumental. That evening, Captain Vasquez arrived at the hospital, the weight of her own investigation still heavy on her shoulders. Dr. Chen met her in the corridor outside the ICU. "We've started the right treatment," Dr. Chen reported. "The diagnosis was correct. Hydrogen sulfide poisoning from her vehicle. She's responding, but the damage is extensive. Recovery will be long, if it comes at all." Vasquez's face hardened. "We've already inspected 20 cars. 17 showed exhaust issues. 3 were as severe as Sarah's. If this hadn't happened, more officers could have been poisoned. Her collapse may have saved lives across the department." Inside the ICU, Sarah's parents sat quietly by her bedside, their hands wrapped around hers. Jake Rodriguez, her partner, stood near the doorway, watching the monitors as if willing them to stay steady. For the first time, there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. On the upper floors of the hospital, Marcus Thompson sat alone in his cell. He had no access to the reports, no way of knowing the flurry of activity his words had caused. But in his heart, he knew. He had recognized the pattern too clearly for it to be anything else. He thought of the officer lying below, surrounded by machines and doctors who didn't even know his name. He thought of the irony. A convicted felon helping to save a police officer's life. It was the kind of twist no one would believe. And yet, it was real. Prison had taken his freedom, his career, his reputation. But it couldn't take his instincts, his knowledge, or his desire to help. Even here, behind bars, he had managed to make a difference. In the ICU, the medical team continued through the night. Every hour brought new challenges: unstable blood pressure, irregular breathing, tremors in her weakened muscles. But now they had direction. They weren't fighting shadows anymore. They were fighting a known enemy. Dr. Park stayed by the bedside longer than usual, her eyes fixed on the monitors. She whispered softly to Sarah, though the detective could not hear her. "You're tough, Officer Martinez. Tougher than this. Hold on." By dawn, Sarah's condition showed measurable improvement. The doctors, still cautious, allowed themselves to breathe. For the first time since her collapse, the word hope returned to their conversations. The truth had been uncovered, the cause identified. Now came the harder part, fighting for her life, step by fragile step. The weeks that followed were a test of endurance for everyone connected to Detective Sarah Martinez. Her family remained at her side. The doctors never let up, and officers from across the precinct visited in steady waves. The ICU, once a place of despair, began to transform into a place of cautious optimism. Day by day, Sarah showed signs of improvement. At first, it was only in the monitors. The faint rise in brain activity, the stabilization of her heart rhythm, a steady increase in her oxygen levels. Then, slowly, the changes became visible. Her fingers twitched when her mother spoke to her. Her eyelids fluttered when Jake Rodriguez leaned close and told her about the precinct. And then, one morning, she opened her eyes fully and looked around the room. Her voice was weak, her words slurred, but when she whispered, "Mom," both parents broke down in tears. The road to recovery was far from easy. Physical therapists worked with her every day, guiding her through simple exercises that left her exhausted. Her muscles were weak, her coordination unsteady. Walking a few steps with assistance felt like climbing a mountain. Yet Sarah never wavered. She approached therapy the way she had approached every challenge in her police career, with determination and grit. Dr. Rebecca Chen, who had led the medical team from the beginning, often visited Sarah during these sessions. "You're tougher than half my residents," she told her one afternoon as Sarah managed to take 10 shaky steps across the hospital room. Sarah only smiled through the sweat and fatigue. "I'm a cop," she whispered. "We don't quit." At the police department, Captain Rita Vasquez pushed forward with sweeping reforms. The inspection of the fleet had revealed disturbing results. 17 vehicles with exhaust problems, 3 as dangerous as Sarah's. Immediate repairs were ordered. Maintenance protocols were rewritten. From now on, every patrol car would undergo monthly inspections with special focus on exhaust systems and air quality. Officers received training on recognizing the signs of chemical exposure: headaches, dizziness, fatigue. What had nearly killed Sarah would not be allowed to happen again. The manufacturer of the patrol vehicles launched its own investigation. Bulletins were sent nationwide, alerting law enforcement agencies to the potential risk. Across the country, patrol cars were recalled and inspected. In cities hundreds of miles away from Phoenix, officers were spared the same fate because of Sarah's ordeal. At Phoenix General, Sarah's case became a teaching tool. Medical residents rotated through her care, learning firsthand the importance of environmental and occupational factors in diagnosis. Dr. Lisa Park developed new toxicology protocols that included testing for enzyme disruption and metabolic markers when standard tests came back negative. "We can't afford to look only at what's obvious," she told her students. "Sometimes the answer hides in the air a patient breathes every day." Dr. Chen, humbled by the experience, changed her teaching style as well. No longer did she focus only on disease and trauma. She asked broader questions about patients' lives, their jobs, their homes, their daily environments. Sarah's case became a turning point in how Phoenix General approached mystery illnesses. Sarah herself continued to improve. By the third week, she could sit up on her own. By the fourth, she could take short walks down the corridor. Jake Rodriguez often accompanied her, cracking jokes to keep her spirits up. "The precinct is falling apart without you," he teased one day. "Nobody keeps the rookies in line like Martinez." Sarah laughed weakly. "Don't get used to it. I'll be back before you know it." Her parents watched her progress with pride and relief. They had been told to prepare for the worst, to expect the possibility of losing their daughter. Now they watched her walk again, slow but determined, her spirit unbroken. On the top floor of the hospital, Marcus Thompson followed the story in silence. He never set foot in Sarah's room, never spoke to her family or the doctors treating her. But he heard enough from nurses and guards to know she was improving. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need his name written in the reports. He knew the truth. His knowledge, his experience, his refusal to stay silent had given Sarah a chance at life. That was enough. In the prison yard, inmates occasionally muttered about the cop downstairs. Some speculated about Marcus's involvement, but he deflected the rumors with practiced ease. Helping a police officer wouldn't earn him respect in prison. Better to let the truth stay hidden. But deep inside, Marcus felt something he hadn't in years, a sense of purpose. Prison had stripped away his freedom, but it hadn't destroyed his ability to help. He had once sworn an oath as a paramedic to do no harm, to protect life wherever he found it. Even behind bars, he was still living that oath. 2 months after her collapse, Sarah was discharged from Phoenix General. She left the hospital with her parents at her side, her steps slow but steady, her determination stronger than ever. Doctors warned her recovery would take months, maybe years, and that some damage might be permanent. But Sarah refused to let that define her. 4 months later, she returned to active duty. Though she carried subtle reminders, occasional memory lapses, slightly slower reflexes, she was back in uniform, serving the city she loved. Her ordeal had changed her, but it had not broken her. At the precinct, she was greeted with applause from fellow officers. Captain Vasquez promoted her to sergeant, citing her resilience and her commitment to duty. Sarah's near-death experience had made her more than just a detective. It had made her a symbol of survival. What no one knew, what would never be written in the official reports, was the role Marcus Thompson had played. His insight had broken the case open. His experience as a paramedic had seen what 20 specialists missed. But his name would remain hidden, buried in confidential files, spoken only in quiet acknowledgments by Dr. Morrison. The world outside would remember Sarah's story as one of medical persistence, police reform, and miraculous recovery. The true origin of her salvation would remain behind bars. Marcus accepted that truth without bitterness. He didn't need applause. He didn't need freedom to feel useful. He only needed to know that he had made a difference, that a woman lived because he hadn't ignored the signs. As Sarah settled back into her life, she carried her own lesson. She had been saved not only by doctors and machines, but by unseen hands, by knowledge that came from an unexpected place. She would never know the name of the prisoner who had seen what no one else could, but she felt a strange sense of connection, as though part of her survival belonged to someone whose face she would never see. For Phoenix General, for the police department, for the vehicle manufacturers, the case became a catalyst for change. For Sarah, it became the story of her life, how she fell to the brink of death and returned stronger. And for Marcus, it became a reminder that even in the darkest places, purpose could still be found. Because sometimes the hero isn't the one wearing the badge or the white coat. Sometimes the hero is the one no one ever notices, sitting silently behind bars, refusing to let compassion die. What would you do in this situation? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next story.